It was the first explosion inside a NATO country linked to the war in Ukraine. The missile that landed last night in Poland and killed 2 of its citizens sparked emergency meetings of NATO and the world's leading democracies, as well as multiple phone calls by President Biden and senior U.S. officials. Today, initial findings suggest that it was an errant Ukrainian air defense missile and not a Russian missile. To discuss this, I'm joined by our Nick Schifrin. Hello, Nick. I know you've been reporting on this since the news first broke. What is known at this point about this explosion?
The investigation is being led by Polish authorities, aided by the U.S. And today, President Andrzej Duda of Poland said it was, quote, highly probable that a Ukrainian air defense missile landed in Poland. We heard from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg as well, who said the explosion was, quote, likely caused by a Ukrainian missile. And this afternoon, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin echoed those assessments.
Our information supports what President Duda said earlier in his preliminary assessment, was that this was most likely a result of a Ukrainian air defense missile.
And this is the aftermath of that missile. What we're talking about here are Ukrainian missiles that they're using to shoot down incoming Russian missiles, what Ukraine uses to defend itself. Yesterday, Russia launched 100 strikes across Ukraine. That is the largest salvo of the war. But here's the thing, Ukraine is not on the same page tonight. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that his military told him that it wasn't them.
I have no reason to doubt the evening report by the commander of the Air Force, delivered to me personally, as well as to Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny. I have no doubt that it was not our missile.
So that is a bit of a disconnect, Judy, between the U.S. and Ukraine. But U.S. officials are increasingly confident in their initial assessment based on things like the investigators, U.S. and Polish, on the ground, based on things like radar, heat tracking, and some intercepted communication. So despite the disconnect, it does seem like this crisis is over. But it was a crisis. The G7 leaders who were meeting in Bali met in an emergency meeting. NATO met in an unscheduled meeting. And President Biden and his top aides huddled. They woke up in the middle of the night. That is Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, Secretary of State Antony Blinken in jeans and a T-shirt taking notes. They spent hours scrambling because there has been a fear that since Russia invaded Ukraine, this war could spill over into NATO. And last night, Judy, for a minute, there was a fear that that had actually happened.
And a lot of people are surprised it had not happened before now.
That's right. That's right.
So let's broaden it out. The war itself. We know Ukraine has had successes, certainly in the last several weeks, but it was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs who just this week suggested that Ukraine ought to be thinking about negotiating.
Yeah, that's right. So we've seen Ukraine seize the only regional capital that Russia seized this year. That is Kherson. But U.S. officials believe that it's getting muddy out there on the battlefield, and that will limit the ability for Ukraine and Russia to really seize or really move the other person very far. And so that's led the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, last week to say that neither side could achieve their military objectives. And he said, quote, when there's an opportunity to negotiate, seize the moment. So he was criticized by some in Ukraine and here for that comment. So today he said explicitly that Ukraine planned to keep fighting.
Ukraine is going to continue to take the fight to the Russians. And I just had a significant conversation with my Ukrainian counterpart, and he assures me that that is the future for Ukraine.
But I was in the room and we pressed him on his comments last week multiple times. He finally admitted that, given the 100,000 plus casualties that Russia has taken in this war, he says perhaps maybe isn't the worst time to negotiate.
The Russian military is really hurting bad. So you want to negotiate at a time when you're at your strength and your opponent is at weakness. And it's possible, maybe, that there'll be a political solution. All I'm saying is there's a possibility for it. That's all I'm saying.
The official U.S. policy, of course, is that only Ukraine can decide when to negotiate. But Ukrainian officials, Judy, tell me and others, they have no desire to negotiate, and they think they can win. And given what Milley is admitting, that victory here is going to be very difficult, the U.S. expects this war to continue for a long time. As Austin said today, I do not think this war will be over anytime soon.
Would love to be a fly on the wall for those conversations between U.S. officials and the Ukrainians.
Absolutely.
Nick Schifrin, thank you.
Thank you.